Indian defence sources say Indian and Chinese troops have been injured in fierce hand-to-hand fighting along their disputed border.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi says his country is hurt and angry following Monday's border clash with Chinese troops in which at least 20 Indian soldiers were killed.
हम अपने देश की अखंडता और संप्रभुता के साथ समझौता नहीं करते।
India has deployed 50,000 troops to its border with China. The military build-up has sparked concerns of a fresh conflict in the Himalayas.
A new investigative report claims that 38 Chinese soldiers died in Galwan Valley.
Hi everybody, on 8th of September 2022, India and China announced that their frontline troops had begun disengaging from the Gogra-Hot Springs area in Ladakh. And here's where the Indian Army and the People's Liberation Army have been locked in a protracted standoff for over 28 months. And if you remember, in May 2020, this started off with a bloody incident where we lost 20 of our soldiers. And as soon as this happened, it sent shockwaves all across the country. And more importantly, with an already ongoing pandemic, this was a major security concern for India. And after 2 long years, finally, the Chinese and Indian troops have agreed upon the disengagement from the line of actual control. Now, while most of us might ignore it considering it to be yet another border dispute, I got to tell you, the Galwan Valley standoff has presented a critical weakness that threatens the security of India, and secondly, it has resulted into a massive change in the entire dynamics of the Indian business ecosystem. So in this case study, let's do a deep dive and try to understand what exactly is this border dispute all about, why is this region so important for India, what does this border dispute have to do with the economy of India, and most importantly, as students of business, what are the lessons that we need to learn from the ripple effect of this Indo-China conflict. To understand this Indo-China conflict, we first have to understand the map of India better. You see, while most of us think this is the map of India, in reality, while you look deep into Kashmir and Ladakh, the story is a little different. First of all, on the left we have Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, which is the Gilgit-Baltistan region. And China even has the China-Pakistan economic corridor passing through the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir region. And on the other side, we have the Aksai Chin. Now when you get into Aksai Chin, you will see the nuances of the borders better. The first boundary is the most obvious one of all, which is the international boundary recognized by India. Then we have the Chinese claim line of 1959, which apparently they consider to be their line of actual control. And then we have our line of actual control, or LAC. This is a notional demarcation line that separates the India-controlled territory from the Chinese-controlled territory. And by the way, this was the portion occupied by China in 1962 war. This is how the borders are defined by each of the parties. And this is where the dispute escalated in 2020. So the question over here is, what exactly is the problem that China has? And after so many years, suddenly why is it bothering India? Well, the first part of this answer lies in something called the DSDBO road. The Darbuk Shlok Daulat Beg Oldie road is a long strategic all-weather road near the LAC that runs parallel to the Chinese border. It connects Ladakh's capital city of Leh, the villages of Darbuk, Shyok at the southern Shyok River Valley with the Daulat Beg Oldie post near the northern border. It is a 255-kilometer long engineering marvel at a height of 13,000 feet and 16,000 feet with 37 military bridges in its way. And this road is extremely important for India for 3 major reasons. Number 1, the road holds great strategic value because it connects Leh to the Karakoram Pass that divides Ladakh from the China's Xinjiang Autonomous Region. DBO is located just 9 kilometers away from the LAC with China, and it helps managing the border and the areas adjoining the Aksai Chin, Chipchap River and the Jivan Nala region. Secondly, from posts along the DSDBO, the Indian troops can keep a very close eye on the Pakistan-occupied areas of Gilgit-Baltistan and the entry point of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. And thirdly, we have the highest airstrip at the DBO. And this airstrip gives the Indian Air Force a 6-fold increase in deployment capabilities. This means we will need fewer flights to deliver larger number of troops, materials and weapons. On top of that, the Indian Air Force has a rapid tactical access to the remotest part of the country. So now, we are capable of rushing our Special Forces commandos in case of an escalation. And guess what? It took India almost 20 years to construct this long road and took more than 43 years to reactivate this airstrip. Apart from that, Some also say that scrapping of Article 370 in 2019 and turning Ladakh into a union territory is actually bothering China. Why? Because now the Indian government can explore its natural resources and develop Ladakh into a resourceful asset for Indian economy. So if China keeps on creating troubles at the border, obviously the foreign investments will be repelled away. So this is where, ladies and gentlemen, the China-India skirmish came up, and this face-off happened at 5 important locations. The first area is the Depsang Plains, and this area is very close to DBO, where India's highest airstrip is located. Then we come to the second point, which is the Galwan Valley, Hot Springs and Godra Post, and this area could again give the Chinese unfettered domination of the DS-DBO road. Here's where we lost 20 of our soldiers in the skirmish. Then we come to the fourth point, which is the northern bank of Pangong Sao and its fingers. And defense officials said that holding Finger 4 offers the Chinese troops a better visual on the Indian troops' position further west. And the fifth position was the southern bank of the Pangong Sao. This is where Chinese troops are said to have fired shots for the first time in 45 years. So now, after 2 long years, the disengagement has started and the situation at the LAC is about to come back to normal. So the question over here is, all of this is geopolitics, right? So if this is not resulting into a war and it's happening 1,000 kilometers away from you and me, then how will it affect us and why should we be worried about this border conflict? Well, this is why, ladies and gentlemen, I want to throw light on the $1 trillion impact that this border dispute has already had in the lives of our citizens. You see, as soon as COVID happened and the news about this dispute broke out, the anti-China sentiment in India spiked. This is when our Prime Minister started insisting on the phrase Atmanirbhar Bharat.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke of a new kind of freedom, the vision of
आत्मनिर्भर भारत। आज से हर भारतवासी को अपने लोकल के लिए वोकल बनना है।
Tensions simmer on the border between India and China. Calls are going up for an economic boycott of the dragon.
चाइना जो हिंदुस्तान के साथ लगातार धोखा दे रहा है उसका विरोध किया जाए।
चाइना को सबक सिखाना है।
चाइना के माल का तीली से माचिस की तीली भी है उसका भी विरोध होना चाहिए।
Slowly but surely, India is boycotting China.
And after the Galwan Valley standoff, we saw the rise of the Boycott China campaign. So as usual, as soon as this moment sparked, social media went crazy, creators including ourselves insisted upon shopping local, and the entire nation came together to support the domestic industries of India. In fact, according to a survey conducted by local circles, 87% of the Indian consumers were willing to boycott Chinese goods. So this must have resulted into a massive increase in domestic sales and a drastic decrease in Chinese sales, right? Because that's what the news was implying. Well, guess what? It was seen that even in Prime Minister's home state of Gujarat in Ahmedabad, 80% of the decorative lights and LEDs sold in shops were still made in China. And in 2020, you must have noticed these bold headlines implying the fact that boycott China has worked. But in reality, the imports did not go down because of boycott China, but because of the pandemic. And fun fact is that it's not just from China, but our imports went down even from other countries like US and UAE. But as soon as pandemic got over, from 2021 onwards, our imports from China have again started hitting new peaks. And you can clearly see that we are now touching the 80,000 crore mark in Chinese imports. And this is not just because of the consumers, but even the businesses could not boycott Chinese products. Why? Because a staggering 70% of the electronic components, 70% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients, and 40% of the leather goods came from China. So obviously, we cannot replace them overnight, right? Now the question over here is, in spite of so many social media trends, in spite of so much anti-China sentiment, how is it that this boycott movement failed? Well, it's just got one reason, and that is cost, cost, and cost. For example, in finished goods, more than half of the smart TVs in India are Chinese. Why? Because the Japanese alternative could be up to 45% costlier. So you tell me, if you're a middle class person making 30,000 rupees a month, I'll show you 2 TVs with the exact same specification. A Chinese product for 20,000 rupees and a made in Japan or made in India product for 28,000 rupees. You tell me, even if you love India, will you pay 8,000 extra to support India? And the same thing goes for businessmen also who are recovering from the pandemic losses. While your competitors are selling a made in China TV for 20,000 rupees, even if you love India, would you sell a TV for 20,000 rupees just because it's made in India? Similarly, Chinese fertilizers are 76% cheaper, electronic circuits are 23% cheaper, and equipments of 5G from Huawei are said to be 20% cheaper as compared to Indian alternatives. This is the story of every sector, every business, and most of the consumers in India, where economics trumps patriotism. So do you realize, in spite of losing 20 of our soldiers, in spite of hating China, we could not give them a fitting reply because the economics is not in our favor. So the question is, if all of this is a gimmick, then what is India actually doing to tackle this problem? Well, this is where we have something called the China +1 strategy. In simple words, we all know that companies from all across the world have their manufacturing hubs in China. So when COVID happened, the supply chain all across the world went for a toss because they were over dependent on just one country, which was China. To make matters worse, China came up with something called the Zero COVID policy.
The new figures show the growing economic damage wrought by the country's ongoing COVID-19 lockdowns.
Beijing's hardline zero COVID strategy could ultimately lead to empty shelves in stores all over the world.
And because of the zero COVID policy, even now, thousands of companies are facing supply chain issues. So a partnership of 18 economies, including India, the US and the EU, have unveiled a roadmap for building a collective, long-term, resilient supply chain to actually decrease their dependencies on China. Now, although this was coined in 2013, it's only after the pandemic that it actually became a serious strategy to be pursued. And what this means is that instead of just China, these companies would invest in one more country as an alternative so that they could protect their supply chains from disruption. So now, we are not competing with China, but other Asian countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand and Bangladesh. And this is where we have something called the Production Linked Incentive Program. And if you've been following thinkschool already, you know that PLI schemes are nothing but government incentives that decrease a company's barrier to enter a particular country. For example, if Apple wants to move from China to India, it needs to make thousands of crores of investment, needs to buy a huge piece of land, it needs to import a lot of equipment and then hope to make a profit. But this is where the government of India would set some benchmark for these manufacturers in exchange for incentives. For example, if they produce 8,000 crore worth of iPhones in India, then they'll be allowed to get a 4 to 6% cashback. And this could save them hundreds of crores. On top of that, for some companies, the government might waive off import duty on equipments, give a discount on the land and sometimes may not even charge taxes until 3 years of their operation just so that they could break even. Add that up with cheap labor and suddenly India becomes an extremely lucrative market for companies. In case of Apple, its contract manufacturers are expected to make iPhones worth 47,000 crores. And this gives the Indian economy 3 major benefits. Number 1, it creates a ton of employment in India. Classic example, Apple's manufacturing itself has created 6,000 jobs in India. Secondly, instead of buying a made in China product and profiting the Chinese economy, a large chunk of the profits will remain in India. And lastly, over 60% of these iPhones produced in India will be exported, which means more profits for India and even better for our forex reserves. Cherry on the cake, if a huge company like Apple comes to India, it's more likely to attract other members in the supply chain to shift to India, eventually boosting our economy and decreasing our dependence on China. Similarly, the government of India is focusing on 10 key areas, including automobiles, pharmaceuticals and electronics to promote manufacturing in India and capitalizing on this China +1 sentiment. This is the reason why you will see that it's not just in India, but even in Thailand, the FDI application rose 80% year on year in the first quarter of 2021. And in Malaysia, FDI grew by 383% year on year, going into manufacturing, services and primary sectors. And by the way, this is where we also have the important angle of GST and how crazy that system is. But for now, it's already information overload, so I'll cover it in the upcoming episodes. So this is a real policy change that will make India less vulnerable both in the market and at our borders. So tomorrow if China does something, the economics can support us in giving them a fitting reply. And this is what brings me to the most important part of the episode, and that are the lessons that we need to learn as investors and students of business from this entire geopolitical / business case study. Meanwhile, if you're someone who wants to capitalize on the China +1 sentiment, you could make your strategic investments through the Small Case app. Small Case is this wonderful company that helps you invest in a basket of stocks to help you make smart investments. In this case, they literally have a small case by the name China +1 Strategy Small Case that will help you invest into the beneficiary companies of the China +1 strategy. The best part is that the small case manager himself will rebalance the stocks based on the market conditions to give you the best possible returns. And just a reminder, don't be driven by emotion and do your due diligence. Read through their blog post before you make your investments into any kind of investment instruments. For this small case, I'll attach a link for their blog post to help you understand it better. So this way, if you want to make strategic investments into the stock market, download the small case app from the link in the description. Moving on, the first lesson that we need to learn is that a skirmish happening 1,000 kilometers away from your house, a zero COVID policy happening on the other side of the border, and a foreign leaders meetup happening on the other side of the globe has triggered $1 trillion business transition that has a huge impact on you, your state, and the economy of your entire country. So just because you don't think geopolitics is not important doesn't make it true. It's a part and parcel of business case studies, and if you really want to excel in business, you should never ignore a border dispute, a foreign leaders meetup, or a foreign policy on the other side of the globe. Lesson number 2. Emotional speeches and social media hashtags cannot change the dynamics of the market, only economics can. So don't be blinded by the twisted stats that media or political parties put forth just to make you feel as if something is happening when nothing actually is. And the last lesson that we need to learn is that the government is the most powerful monopoly that can turn any industry into a gold mine or a landmine. As investors, every time a war or tension between two countries happens, always take a pen and paper and try to understand the chain reaction to see how the policies of the government will change the dynamics of the market. In this case, it's the PLI scheme that can help you find the stock market gems in the industry. That's all from my side for today, guys. If you learned something valuable, please make sure to hit the like button in order to make YouTube Baba happy. And for more such insightful business and political case studies, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.